Hi everyone, my name is Ashlyn Biggers. Today I'm going to be walking you through the process of making a small bowl on the potter's wheel from start to finish. Before we get started today, I wanted to take this opportunity to tell you a little bit about myself. I'm originally from around Raleigh, North Carolina. I was born and raised there. I eventually went to East Carolina University where I got my bachelor's in fine arts in art with a concentration in ceramics. I never thought that I would be able to find a job doing what I love that would support me full-time, and I was lucky enough to find that here in Huntsville, Alabama about a year and a half ago. So I made the trek. I'm here and I'm very blessed to be able to work in this studio every day, elbow deep in mud, and just have some fun and make beautiful functional pieces for the community here around Huntsville. All right, let's get started. Let me first off apologize if I seem nervous. I don't normally do this in front of a lot of people, but we're just gonna have some fun and I'm gonna walk you through everything step by step. So one of the most important things about having a successful pot and a successful process is your prep work. So that's where we're gonna get started. I just have a scale that will tell me how many ounces of clay I'm gonna be weighing out. I know that it takes me about 1 pound of clay to get the size bowl that I want. So I'm gonna take my prepackaged clay and my wire tool, and I'm gonna cut off a few pieces because let's be honest, there are a lot of areas where things can go wrong in pottery, and we are no stranger to failure around here. So I'm gonna make sure I have some extra in case I mess up my first couple bowls. We'll just get prepared for that right off the bat. All right, so all I'm doing is adding some more clay until I get to 16 ounces. That's perfect. And I'm gonna do maybe 3 more pieces and I'll be right back. All right, now that I have my clay all weighed out, I'm gonna give you guys a closer look on this next stage of the process, which is called wedging. Wedging is really similar to kneading dough for those of you that are bakers. It's a little bit different. We're looking for a texture change. We're looking to get rid of any air bubbles, and we're gonna do that by pushing the clay and rolling it back on top of itself to kind of push any of those air bubbles out. There are a few different methods of wedging. The method that I prefer for this size of clay is called ram's head wedging, and you'll see why it's called that in just a moment. So I'm gonna get started on wedging these. I'll give you a closer look and then we'll move on to the next step. All right, here we are with one of these 16-ounce pieces of clay that I weighed out earlier. Now we're gonna get into ram's head wedging. You'll see what I mean in just a minute when I say ram's head. I'm gonna demonstrate the process for you. All I'm doing is pressing and pulling back towards myself and pressing again. And that motion is repeated. I'm using the sides of my hands to kind of hold the clay in place in a C shape. You can do this process fast or slow. It does the same thing. We're really just wanting to kind of soften the clay up a bit. If there are any pieces of clay that are harder than another piece, we just want it to be the same consistency, and I'm pushing out any of those excess air bubbles. So as you can see, this is why it's called ram's head wedging. It forms a little face of a ram. All right, this is what comes of wedging. We're looking for a nice round ball that is soft in texture, perfect for moving and pulling on the wheel. I'm gonna take you over to the wheel and we'll get started with the fun part. All right, here we are at the wheel. I'm gonna walk you through the basic tools that I'm gonna use to create this small bowl. Every potter has a different set of tools that they prefer. Some potters use different tools for different pieces. These are really the basics I choose to use. This one is called a shark's tooth rib. It's made out of wood. It has a flat side and a curved side, and I can use it on the outside in place of my hand to shape a piece how I want to. It allows me to not have to use as much moisture, which can sometimes make a piece collapse if it's got too much water in it. This is called a wooden knife. My professor in school used to call it a bob tool, and I went several years thinking that it was called a bob tool. I think he just liked to name his tools, so funny story. It is called a wooden knife. This is used multi-purposely around the studio, but as far as throwing goes, I just use it to trim excess clay off of the bottom of my bowl before I take it off the wheel. It just allows me to spend less time trimming. This is called a needle tool. It has a very sharp point. Again, this is a multi-purpose tool that we use around the studio. When it comes to throwing, you can use it to trim clay off your piece or trim the rim off of your piece. Test the thickness of the bottom of your pot as well. And of course, we have a sponge, and I have my bucket of water here and some towels, and I'd say we're ready to get going. All right, so for this to work properly, you gotta get your hands very wet and your clay has to be wet. You get your piece going. You wanna make sure it's nice and stuck to your wheel head. I'm using my hands to center the clay on the wheel, and I'm pulling it up. This is called coning. It's a form of wedging on the wheel, I guess you could say. It just reinforces that my clay is all an even consistency and that I don't have any excess air bubbles. The reason air bubbles are such a big deal is when I'm pulling this clay up, if I have a pocket of air in here that's gonna get caught on my fingers, it could very well drag the rest of my pot with it. And that's no good, because then I have to start over. Now that my clay is nice and centered, my hands are nice and slippy, I can begin to open up my piece of clay. We're gonna create a donut of sorts, so I'm gonna press my fingers into the center of the clay and create the opening, and that's gonna create the bottom of my pot. So I don't wanna go all the way down. I wanna leave about 1/4 of an inch there, or more if you know you're gonna be trimming your piece. I'm just creating a little opening. So this is the very start of our bowl here. Along the way, I'm compressing the rim. Compressing just makes sure that all of those clay particles are still in line and we don't get any sharp or raggedy edges. It tends to create a stronger rim, so if you accidentally bang it on the sink when you're washing it, it's less likely to break off if you have a nice sturdy rim. So now we're gonna begin opening up our pot. I have my left hand on the inside of the clay and I have my right hand on the outside. I tend to pull with my knuckles. Some people will pull with their fingertips. It's personal preference. I'm gonna begin opening up my pot. right, here we are with a leather hard bowl. Trimming starts with finding the center of your pot again, but your pot needs to be turned upside down because we're going to be manipulating the foot of our pot this time. So for trimming, this is the tool that I'm going to be using. It's called a ribbon tool. It has a round end on one side and a rectangular or square end on the other. And I'm just going to be creating the foot ring of my pot. So you can see the difference between my trimmed foot ring and my untrimmed foot ring. So this is kind of the general idea of what I'm going to be doing, and we're going to get started. Some people like to cover up the marks of their tools. That's a personal preference. I like to leave some in there. It's a little bit of a maker's mark, if you will. No two pieces are gonna look alike as it is, but I think it's really nice when you get a little hint of the process in there. All right, now that we have thrown our bowl on the wheel, we've trimmed it, we've set it out to dry for a couple of days, this is the result that you're gonna see. This stage is called bone dry. There's no more water left in the clay, or very minimal amount of water. This is the most fragile state that your pot's gonna be in. If I were to accidentally set it down too hard, it would crack, but this is the perfect stage for it to be in to go through our first firing, which is called a bisque firing. The temperature that we use when we fire our pots is around 1,945 degrees. So we put it in our kiln, we set up a special program that gets it to that temperature in a certain amount of time, and this is what we end up with. There's a chemical process that occurs in a bisque fire that takes the clay particles and turns them into ceramic. This is a great start to move on to our next stage, which is prepping for glazing. All right, now we're gonna be waxing the bottom of our piece. So I'm gonna use a sponge or a brush, and I'm just gonna paint this wax on. And I'm gonna go around and fill in all the empty spaces. And then we're gonna leave this to dry before we go dip it or paint our glaze on. Okay, so we have our glaze here and we have our bowl. With dipping, you learn based on the thickness of your glaze how long you need to hold your piece in there for. If the glaze is thicker on your piece or thinner, it can look different in the firing. First things first, we need to mix up our glaze. So you'll see when I go to dip my piece that it dries almost immediately. The glaze color that you see on the pot at this stage is not gonna be what it looks like at the final stage. So I'm gonna dip it, hold it, and lift it out. And you can see the great job that our wax is doing by resisting the glaze from sticking in that area. And you can see that it's starting to dry almost immediately. I can actually touch it and nothing comes off my hand. Before we load it in the kiln, we're gonna clean it up a little bit, let it dry, and then we're on our way to the final firing. Here we are. Our glazed piece is loaded into the kiln. We're gonna close it, open it up, and see how it turns out. Here we are. So we've taken our bowl out of the final firing. We crossed our fingers. We hoped everything would turn out okay. We opened it up, felt like Christmas morning, and it looks like everything came out fine. I hope you enjoyed this process and got a little bit of insight into what it takes to make a handmade bowl on the potter's wheel. Now you get to go home and enjoy the fruit of your labor, whether you made it yourself or you got it from a local artist that puts a lot of love into what they do. Ice cream, pasta, I myself tend to enjoy a late night bowl of cereal. I don't know about you. I'd love to hear your feedback and even get to know you, so please feel free to email me. My email is ashlynbiggers7@gmail.com, or you can reach me on Instagram at ashlyn_biggers. Again, thank you so much for joining me. I look forward to hearing from you, and please continue to stay happy and healthy.